Hey, it's Dan Kenner here again with episode 5 of the Tirran Tales. This one is titled On a Worm Horse. Stephen watched the TV intently, waiting to see what happened to Super Billy Bob, his favorite hero on his favorite TV show. "Stephen, did you hear me?" his mother called from the other room. "Yup, I heard you. Just a minute," Stephen said. When the show ended, Stephen smiled to himself. That was the greatest episode yet, he thought. "Stephen, the rain just started. Did you get your toys put away?" Nancy, his mother, asked. Stephen's eyes widened. Is that what his mother had said? He wasn't listening to her. The show was just so good that he didn't actually hear what she said to him. No, it's okay. Those toys can get wet, I think," he called back to her. "Stephen, they aren't meant to get wet. If you can't take care of your toys, then we will just stop buying you new ones. I think you should go out and get the toys." Stephen looked out the window to see that it was raining very heavily. He shrugged. "I think they will be okay. Don't worry," he yelled back to Nancy. He heard her sigh heavily, but she didn't say anything else. Stephen slumped back in his chair. He was glad that he convinced her that he didn't have to go and get wet. But now that his favorite show was over and the rain had started, he realized that he didn't have anything to do. Stephen wondered if it was raining in Tirran right now, like it was raining here. So he jumped off his chair and started walking to his room. As he passed the kitchen, his mother turned to look at him, her arms folded. "I wish you'd just listen to me. Those toys aren't meant to get wet. They will break if you leave them." "Mom, it's fine. I'll get them when it's all over," he said, walking quickly to his room. When Stephen got to his room, he closed the door behind him and pulled out the chest. He already had forgotten what his mother had said to him and what he said to her in return. Opening the chest, Stephen braced himself as the familiar pull of the chest, and then he fell forward inside of it. In no time, he was laying on the grass outside of Hubert, the tree with the portal home. Stephen smiled at the sights around him. He looked up to see that the sun was still shining through the thick trees above him. Though he couldn't tell if it was very cloudy or not, he knew that it wasn't raining, and that was enough. "I guess the weather in Tirran isn't the same as where I come from," he thought. He hoped that Amethyst had something exciting for them to do today. The last time they'd come, he thought that all the plants in the weird living garden were really cool. Before long, he was knocking on Amethyst's tree, waiting for the hidden door to appear out of the trunk. Sure enough, the cracks of the door appeared and the door swung inward. "Hey, Stephen!" Amethyst exclaimed, rushing out to give him a hug. "Come in! We are about to go for my worm riding lessons." Stephen eyed her. "Worm riding? How do you ride worms?" he asked. "You just get on top of them and kick them in the side, kind of like horses." Stephen gaped at her. "If you have horses, why do you ride worms? Also, I still don't know how you can ride something so small." Stephen put his hand up to his face and held his fingers out to about the size of a worm. Amethyst laughed at him. "No, not the small ones, silly, the big ones. They are big enough for even my mom to ride. If they have grown up, at least." "They sound creepy. Worms are really cool, but I don't think that I'd want to see one that is as big as I am." Amethyst shrugged. "I think that they are cool. Riding them can be a bit tricky, though, which is why my mom signed me up for lessons." Stephen felt a little jealous of her. "I probably shouldn't come then. If your mom had to sign you up, then I won't be allowed to ride them without permission." Just then, Pearl, Amethyst's mother, came down the stairs in front of them. Pulling on the thin jacket, her silver hair was pulled up in a tight bun on top of her head. "Oh, hello, Stephen. Glad to see you again today. How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm okay. It sounds like you were about to leave, though, so I don't want to bother you right now." "Nonsense. You can come along," Pearl said. "But Amethyst said that you had to sign her up for the lessons. I don't think that they'll let me ride a worm." Stephen had a hard time saying it because it sounded so weird. How about you just come along and we can see what they'll say? I know that you are not from here and you didn't get signed up for the lessons, but perhaps we can work something out, Pearl replied. Okay, I'll come then. The three set out toward the town made of treemen. Just before they entered the town lines, however, they turned right and followed the tree line deeper into the forest until the small town disappeared. It was still daytime, so they didn't have a hard time seeing. But this part of the forest had a lot more trees, all of them normal brown and green ones. They exited the trees into a large opening with fences all around in a circle. There was a large barn and an open door in the fences. Stephen gasped when he saw what was inside. Thick, pink worms lounged inside the fence line, but they were twice his own size. Stephen's stomach turned at the sight of such large worms, and he started to back away. Those are creepy. It was all that Stephen could say at seeing them. They are cute, I think, Amethyst gushed, looking over at them. How do you get them to grow that big? Our worms are so small compared to those, Stephen said. Well, they are bred that way. Their parents were big worms too, so they grow up to be big worms themselves. See? Pearl pointed over to another pen full of 5 or 6 even bigger worms. These were as tall as a horse would be on Earth. Those others don't look so big anymore, Stephen said, gulping at the sight. Come on! Amethyst grabbed Stephen's hand and pulled hard on it. Wait! Amethyst, you aren't supposed to go that way, remember? Please come back now, Pearl said to her daughter. Oh, Mom, it's fine. We'll be okay. She kept pulling hard on Stephen's hand, and he kept trying to pull back. Stephen wondered why Pearl had told him not to go this way, but they soon found out as they ran right into a mud patch. Blast! I guess that's why my mom said to not go this way, Amethyst whined, pulling her feet up through the mud. As she did, her feet made loud squelching sounds. Stephen looked down at his shoes and how muddy they were. His mother would be very upset at him for getting those shoes ruined like this. We should have listened to your mom, Stephen said, grumbling. It's just a little mud. Wash it off and we'll be fine. Once they'd pulled themselves out of the mud, they made it to the corral where a few other elf children sat with their legs crossed. Hello, Amethyst. Who is your friend? I don't think I've met him before, a tall elf man said. His hair and eyes were both deep red, which looked very strange on a person. His red hair and eyes, paired with his light blue skin, reminded Stephen of Super Billy Bob, his favorite superhero. This is Stephen. He came today hoping to learn how to ride worms too. Is that okay? The instructor looked Stephen up and down and nodded. Sure, but you'll have to pay for him to join, the red-haired man said. I can take care of that, Pearl said, coming from behind them. She must have gone a different way to get to the fence, for she didn't have any traces of mud on her. She glanced down at Amethyst and Stephen's muddy feet and frowned. The man nodded at Pearl, then looked at the kids. Very good. I can get that from you later. For now, have a seat. They both sat down and readied themselves for the lesson. All right, I think that's everyone. Let's get started then. Ain't no use waiting. The tall man held up a heavy-muscled arm and pointed out the giant worms. Those are worms. They look really squishy and nice, but riding them isn't as squishy and nice. It ain't at all like riding a horse, but it's a little bit like it. First thing to know, climb up the worm on the side like a horse. Don't go trying to climb up the tail or the head. It won't go well for you. Stephen's mind had already wandered. He could hear the man talking, but his eyes had looked over at the giant worms in the corral. They looked so squishy and were pinkish in color. They didn't have any faces, no eyes or ears that he could see. He thought about how people on Earth would be scared to see such big things. Once you're on, don't go pulling on their skin all hard like they don't like it. And if you do, it won't go well for you. Stephen heard the last part and snapped back to listen. Wait, what? What won't go well for us? He whispered to Amethyst. Weren't you listening? She asked. I got a little distracted, Stephen admitted. He said to not pull on their skin because it will hurt them. I guess there's a different way to make them go when you need them to, Amethyst said, turning back to the instructor. If you need them to turn right, pat their right side like this twice. If you need them to turn left, do the same thing on this side. I've trained them up right good, so they should follow. Don't get going too fast, though. You don't want to get hurt. Worms will wiggle right good on their own, but if you need them to go straight, just pat them once on one side, hit them once on the other, and they'll wiggle out like this. The instructor came to the side of the worm and slipped a leg up and over, hoisting himself on the thick middle. As soon as he was steady, he patted the side of the worm softly to make it bend that way, and then immediately patted the other side to make it bend the other way. He continued to do this, and as soon as the worm was wiggling forward at a steady pace. If you go too fast, you'll get wiggled right off. Stephen looked at him. That doesn't look hard at all. All right, it's your turn, he said. Amethyst, Stephen, and the other 3 elf kids chose a worm and stood next to it. Remember how to get on, the instructor prompted. Stephen didn't remember. He hadn't been paying attention when the man had spoken. He eyed his worm, deciding that it would be easier to climb up the front of it since it was small there. It sloped upward to the thickest part of the squishy worm. The moment he started walking up the tip of the worm, however, it flicked its tail upward, throwing Stephen backwards onto his bum. Ouch! He shouted, his backside hurting. Hey, I told you to get on the side. Weren't you listening? Stephen blushed. I just forgot. Soon enough, Stephen climbed up the side of his worm and wished he'd listened better to the teacher. All right, start patting them, the man instructed. They each began patting the worm one side at a time. As Stephen did so, his worm wiggled to and fro, following his pats. When he patted the left, it bent left. When he patted right, it wiggled right. Stephen felt the soft flesh of the worm under his legs, and he shivered. It wasn't scary, but it felt like he was sitting on a waterbed that moved on its own. Soon, all of the kids were laughing and giggling as they rode the worms forward slowly. Now, to turn, just pat them twice on the side, the red-haired elf said. Stephen gave it a try. He patted twice on the left side of the worm, and it turned sharply that direction. He smiled. This is way easier than I thought, Stephen said. The elf instructor shouted out to them, Now remember, don't get going too fast now. It may feel easy now, but if you go too fast, it could be hard for you to stay on and keep your rhythm. Hey, Stephen, let's race, Amethyst said, steering her worm up beside his. I don't know. He said that we should go slow, Stephen said, worried. Oh, but it's so easy. Ready, set, go, she shouted. She began patting her worm left and right, one at a time, making her worm wiggle quickly forward. Stephen soon decided that it was really easy and that he didn't want her to win that easily. He was patting his worm left and right, the worm wiggling its pink flesh back and forth so quickly that it shuffled along the ground after Amethyst. She was moving a lot more quickly than he was, and he had to pat furiously on either side to get his worm to catch up. Hey now, you two! Careful now, you'll get knocked off! The instructor shouted after them. They both ignored the man, determined to win the race. Last one to the fence line is a worm eater, Amethyst shouted to Stephen. They each were patting their worms so hard that Stephen could feel his legs slipping upward, the speed of the worm threatening to pull him off. He just clenched his legs tighter and patted the worm even faster to try to catch up. Soon they were laughing neck and neck in the race. the fence getting closer all the time. Stephen's hands were starting to get tired, and he could feel the strain on his arms. He looked over to see that Amethyst was breathing hard and having a hard time keeping up the pace. Yes, I could win, he thought. Just as he did, however, he lost the rhythm of the patting, and he accidentally patted the right side twice. He screamed as the worm, still moving quickly, darted to the right. Even though he was holding on to the worm with his legs tightly, it wasn't enough to keep him on top. He felt his body fly through the air, and he collided right into Amethyst, who was then pushed off of her worm. The two elf kids fell into a puddle of thick mud on the ground. They both groaned from the fall. Ouch, that didn't feel good, Amethyst said, holding her head. Stephen's arms and one of his legs hurt. I think we got going a little too fast, Stephen said, grumbling at the pain. I right told ya all to keep it slow. Why didn't you listen? The instructor said, coming up to them. Are you all right? You could have been killed. Are you hurt? Pearl came running into the corral and knelt down beside them. Why were you both going so fast? He told you that you should take it slow and keep your rhythm, she asked. The kids both looked down. Sorry, they said at the same time. I thought it would be fun to race because riding them felt so easy, Amethyst admitted. She winced as her mother put a hand on her arm. I think you broke this, and you are a mess. We'll need to get you home and cleaned up. But Mom, I don't want to. I want to stay and ride the worm horses more, Amethyst complained. I don't know if we can. You didn't listen, and look what happened. You and Stephen got pretty hurt, Pearl said, looking disappointed. Stephen felt like crying, partially from the pain and partially because he didn't want to be done. Look, we have some medical elves on hand. How's about we get you fixed up and you get a second chance? But you have to promise to listen to me. How's that sound? Stephen and Amethyst nodded quickly. Soon, an elf woman dressed in simple brown clothes came out with some bandages. As she wrapped their arms and Stephen's legs in bandages, her hands glowed green, and he could feel warmth on his skin. That's healing magic, Amethyst told him as she worked. Some people are blessed with that as their power. It comes in handy sometimes. When the woman was done, she smiled at them and left. His arm still ached a little bit, but the pain was mostly gone. Are you both sure about this? We can go home if you want, Pearl said. No, they said together. We will be okay, Stephen assured her. Soon they were back on their worms and listening to every word the teacher had to say. It did turn out easier than they thought, and it was really fun to wiggle around on the thick and soft worms for so long. After the lessons, they thanked the teacher and walked back to Amethyst's house. Stephen didn't stay long, though, because he realized that he hadn't listened to his mom just before he came, and now he realized how bad it was not to listen. Quickly, he ran to Hubert and dove into the tree trunk. He fell out of the chest with a bump, closed the lid, and ran to his mom. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't listen, and you're right. My toys are probably broken, he said, feeling sad. Nancy smiled at him. I'm glad that you finally decided to listen. The rain isn't too bad yet. How about we both go out together and get them as fast as we can, she suggested. Stephen nodded, thankful for her offer. They were able to gather most of the toys in before the rain got too heavy. His electronic car had already broken, but some of his other toys didn't get too wet and still worked. Stephen was grateful he learned how important it is to listen. The end.